I love baseball and I love politics, so it's perfect for me. But you were able to weave in not just the presidents in baseball, but to weave in history of what was going on with baseball, coincidentally, what was going on in politics through each presidential era.
Well, thank you very much, Graham. Great to be with you. Ever since I was little, I've been enamored of the presidency in baseball, and I guess it was only a matter of time before I finally got around to doing this book. But I think I've got a lot of company because these are our two great institutions, the National Office of the Presidency, the National Game of Baseball. It appealed to you. It appealed, I think, to tens of millions of people. So finally, this is my 17th book, and the mystery to me is not that I wrote the book, but that it took me so long to write it.
Well, they're both our national pastime, right? Politics and baseball. Early on in the book, you focus on the early presidents, if you will, not too far in our past. In our recent past, last 100, 120 years or so. We're looking at Taft and Wilson, who both cherished baseball. Harding actually owned a baseball team, not a major league team, but he owned a baseball team. And Coolidge said essentially that he thought baseball made him or others look more human. These presidents had fascinating looks at baseball back then.
Well, they do. William Howard Taft, all 300 pounds of him, incidentally, was the first to throw out a first ball to commence the beginning of the baseball season in 1910. And they had to literally extricate two box seats from the forerunner to Griffith Stadium to allow him to sit down and then rise to throw out the first ball. Woodrow Wilson loved the game just as much as Taft did, and might have been the first baseball commissioner had he not suffered his grievous stroke in the second term. But even then, baseball was his refuge. He would get in the presidential limousine and go to Griffith Stadium. It was his sole oasis amid his ill health. Then Warren Harding was a bit of a hypocrite, and I say this with some benignity. He for example, supported prohibition, the banning of alcohol, the sale or use of it in public. But in private, he loved the game, and whenever Babe Ruth and the Yankees would come to Washington to play the Senators, he would have the Bambino down to the Oval Office, and he and the Babe would uncork the best bourbon that money could buy. And then, of course, as you say with Calvin Coolidge, he was a baseball know-nothing. But he had a wife who had been the official scorer at the University of Vermont. So in 1924, when Coolidge was trailing badly in the polls, his Republican elite, the GOP hierarchy, had the brilliant idea of basically twinning in the public mind Coolidge to the Washington Senators, who were streaking to their first and sadly only world title, so that by the end of the campaign, with Mrs. Coolidge writing his baseball speeches and in essence talking about the armored knights of the bat and ball, the average American thought that Calvin Coolidge was a baseball savant, and he won every state except the solidly Democratic South.
And the human drama of the Senators is kind of a side note throughout the book, FYI. Herbert Hoover, page 62. Interesting, speaking of Babe Ruth. You have this quote: Babe made another campaign photo wearing a suit, top hat, and sign that read, "I'm for Al Smith." That seemed to end the matter, except that a few days later, Publicity Flack asked Ruth if he would pose with Hoover visiting Yankee Stadium. "No, sir," said the Babe. So obviously Babe Ruth was making a bit of a political statement there, supporting Herbert Hoover's opponent in the 1928 election.
And then in 1932, he supported Franklin Roosevelt, so he was certainly consistent. In 1930, of course, Herbert Hoover, a decent and a very shy man, buried by the Depression, and Babe Ruth was asked how he could defend a salary greater than Herbert Hoover. And Ruth said famously, "But I had a better year than he did."
Yeah.
And he did.
Herbert Hoover, at one of the games you chronicle, was heckled by the crowd. "We want beer." Of course, they were in the thralls of Prohibition at the time there. FDR, throughout the first pitch a couple times, broke somebody's glasses at one point, but made a significant announcement in January of 1942, and this was that baseball would proceed even during World War II.
About as significant as you can, Graham. After the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor, baseball was clueless about whether it should proceed. Should it close up shop, proceed in a diminished state? So the commissioner of baseball wrote FDR a letter. "Please, Mr. President, give us guidance on how to proceed." FDR did. The day after receiving the letter, he held a presidential press conference that shows the importance of baseball to the land, and FDR read the entirety of his letter to the commissioner.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One America News on YouTube, and call your cable provider and kindly demand that One America News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.